Tighten up, leaders. Welcome to the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership, the show that drills into the foundations of what leadership is all about. I'm your producer and co-host, Haley Gibson.
And I'm your host, Billy Duran.
Join us as we sit down with leaders from across the country to mine for nuggets of wisdom.
All right, everyone, welcome into the meeting room. We're here today because we're going to be talking about leadership because this is the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership podcast. I'm the host, Billy Duran, and I'm in the meeting room today with Haley Gibson, our producer and co-host. Haley, welcome back to the meeting room, and what's your nugget of the day?
One of the things that I love to do when we get a new employee in is to talk about who we are, what we do, and why we do it. And I had the opportunity yesterday to sit down with one of our employees and really get a fresh look at who we are. Because I got to see him looking at us with fresh eyes. And to me, that's one of the joys of being able to talk about who we are.
It really is a great opportunity when we get to share the story because you learn about more about what you know about the company when you tell the story about the company than just hearing it. So, Haley, very excited today about our guest, Kathy Mazzarella. She is the chairman and CEO of Graybar, employee-owned Fortune 500 distributor of electrical communications and data networking products. Kathy joined Graybar in 1980 as a customer service rep. She progressed through various sales, management, VP roles before being named president and CEO. Kathy, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you for the invitation, and I look forward to visiting with you today.
So we have been really looking forward to this for quite some time, and we had talked about this a little bit before we got started, that it's kind of started with a letter when I read your story. We have some similarities in when and how we got started with a company, but your company has blossomed under your leadership, and we are so looking forward to hearing more about your story. When you think about 9,000 employees and what that means to each employee owner that you're dealing with, Kathy, and the magnitude of that, when you consider that all the way back to where you began, tell us a little bit about your journey with Graybar to the CEO spot.
Well, very similar to your story, I did start in an entry-level role. I didn't start in the warehouse like most people did because in that case, our warehouse was union and they wouldn't let us start there. So I started as a customer service rep at the ripe old age of 19. I had dropped out of college, much to the chagrin of my parents. I had a full scholarship, a science and math scholarship, and I walked away from it because I didn't want to be a doctor. So I moved in with my parents, and 3 days after I moved in, we mutually decided I needed to get a job. So I went looking for a job and went to an employment agency who sent me on an interview. I got lost on the way to the interview and went in to ask for directions. And they said, "Hey, you're looking for a job. We're hiring. Do you want to take the test?" And I said, yes. And 3 days later, I started at the company that I now get to serve in this leadership role. So didn't know anything about distribution, didn't know anything about the industry, and started as a customer service rep. Was at for about a year, went into quotes for 6 months, went into sales at the ripe old age of 20. Back then, in those days, they drank at lunch. That was the thing. You would entertain your clients. Well, legally, I couldn't drink because I wasn't old enough. So I started the teetotaler group with our customers. And from there, I was in sales for about 5 years and went into sales management, went into product management, went into international sales, corporate accounts, which is our large customers, went into strategic planning, took a detour into HR for a while, came back into marketing and sales, and then COO before president. So I've had a long career. Graybar afforded me the opportunity to finish my degrees. I have an associate's, a bachelor's, and a master's degree, and the company supported those activities, which has been great.
So it's interesting when someone thinks about saying to you, "Kathy, you just don't understand." They can't quite say that to you because you've been in so many roles throughout the organization. They can't quite say that. I appreciate you going through that journey, telling us a little bit about all the places. I actually have a note to ask you about that. You said you had a detour in HR. I'm going to ask you about that a little bit later. And although our journeys are similar in that the number of years and kind of how we got started, the magnitude of the size that Graybar has blossomed into under your leadership is incredible. I can't go without telling you congratulations on what you've done and what you've accomplished. And you said something earlier that our listeners will have picked up on. You said, I get to do this. I get to serve. And that's important to leaders and to our emerging leaders that are listening, not just the emerging leaders at Threaded Fasteners, but those emerging leaders at Graybar, to hear the CEO say, I get to serve. What a privilege it is to hear our senior most leaders say those words. So I appreciate you saying that. What were in that journey? You know, you're going through all these different positions. Was it dawning on you that you were developing into the next step, into the next model? And it's somewhere along the way, did you go, you know what, I think I can be the CEO of this organization? How did that come to you?
Well, my father raised us with this one objective. He kept saying, whatever you do, you always shoot for the top, because the only failure in life is if you don't reach high enough. Because even if you don't get there, you've moved yourself forward, you've developed your gifts, you've developed skills, which you can help other people with, right? I mean, so that was my dad's philosophy all along. So we were always raised to go for the number one position. When I was interviewed, here I am again, college dropout, had no idea what I was doing, the age of 19. And the gentleman that hired me, Roger Cutler, asked me, what do I want to do? I said, I want to be president of this company. And he didn't laugh. He did not laugh. Now, if I would have known what it took to get there, I might not have said that. You know, I mean, that was naive, but that was also good. I mean, sometimes what happens is we get overwhelmed by the objective or goal and we don't even start because we look at it and say, it's too big. You know, there's no way I can get there. I always tell people the key for it is to face your fears and to put one foot forward. And when you take that step into the unknown, it's not as scary as you may think. And it's the same thing with leadership or objectives. Set those big goals, put them in a realistic time frame. That's what my dad said. Big goals, realistic time frame, and you'll get there. Because if you stay focused on that objective, then what happens is, regardless of where your life leads you, and nobody's career path is straight to the top, right? The best leaders, talk about resilience, and they've had to overcome challenges and all that type of stuff because it builds character, it builds strength, it builds, empathy, all the things that are important for leaders. I think if you set your goals high enough, what you understand is your job is also to bring people with you along that way so that they can also develop their gifts and recognize their potential.
So you said something when we were talking just a few minutes ago before we got started on that you said, I bet you have found a lot of consistencies in the CEO interviews, and we have. You mentioned your dad. One of the most consistent when we ask leaders who has influenced you in your leadership journey, one of the most consistent answers are parents. The parents and their impact on their children, developing their own work ethic, leadership styles, which kind of brings me to the next question. If we were to pull somebody out of the halls of Graybar and said, tell me what kind of leader Kathy is, what's her leadership style? What would they say about you?
Well, it would run the whole gamut. My brother used to tell me that I have an iron fist and a velvet glove. That's a famous Napoleon Bonaparte, quote, that I can be both strong and gentle at the same time. He says, you put your arm around people and then you kick them in the tail at the same time and say, it's going to be okay, but get going. So most people would describe me as tough, very driven, very focused. I ran into a woman that I went to high school with. I haven't seen her since I left high school at 18, ran into her. She came through town and she said, we've always knew you would be successful because you were always so driven and focused and tough. I mean, she used the same words. I didn't realize that, 18, that I was that way, but apparently I had some of those similar traits. I'd say people would also say that I set extremely high expectations for myself. I, unfortunately or fortunately, depend on who you ask, share those expectations with my team. So I expect them to step up also. As a senior leader, it is important that we perform to our best because we expect our people to perform. We need to perform as well, if not better. It's our obligation to set those examples. I also believe you shouldn't settle Complacency will destroy organizations, will destroy leaders. I'd say if people aren't growing, it's like plants. If things don't grow, whether it's an organization or a plant or even people, you tend to die. You tend to wither on the vine and you really start fading away and you don't give your best. And I would say sometimes I'm empathetic, sometimes I'm not. Normally, what I try to do is figure out if somebody's underperforming and it's out of character, is really to try to find out what's going on underneath that. Because it's important to recognize that people bring their whole self to work. And as much as we like to think we can compartmentalize, you can't. Life gets in the way sometimes. So it's important for us to understand what's going on with the person and to make sure that we provide as much support as we can to help them get through whatever those challenges may be, to help them get to the other side. So I would say one of my favorite phrases is gentle pressure relentlessly applied. It's moving forward, moving forward, moving forward. It's important as a leader not to let organizational inertia push you back. You've got to hold firm. But as you well know, you can't do it on your own. I use the analogy all the time growing up. There were 5 kids in my family, and I grew up in Southern California, so we used to go into the ocean a lot. I used to dive in, and the waves would knock me over. I would try to stand in the sand sometimes and see if I could fight the waves knocking me over, but it would always knock me, and I'd get tied up, and my mom or my brothers or sisters would have to come pull me out. Then one time I got the smart idea to link arms with the 5 of us. And the 5 of us linked our arms and dug our feet in the sand. And what would happen is the wave would still knock into us. It would move us back. Maybe one of us would go down, but we never would go under because everybody else would pull us up. That same philosophy I try to use at work is that if we are together, we focus our energies and focus our talents and gifts toward a common objective, there is nothing that can stop us from attaining our goals or our dreams. Nothing.
Well, I appreciate you using the words, and I'm hearing them all throughout your stories as you use the words we, our, and us. And to me, again, that shows what genuine leadership is all about. It's bringing the team together, focusing on what we can do together. We like to talk about it, the quicker we can move our employee owners into Weeville, we've got them. Once we move them into Weeville, there's this isolationism that can keep them out there on the edges. But the sooner we move them into Weeville, and I start hearing that in their voice, I know that they are throwing their heart in. We talk about this a little bit of our language. I can buy your feet, your hands. I can buy your head, but I cannot buy your heart. At some point, you got to throw your heart in for free. And when I see our team doing that, that's when I know that we are resonating with them, and they are becoming a part of this organization. So you mentioned your team a minute ago, and we like to ask our CEO guests who are coming in, what are the qualities you look for in great team leaders? And that question is a little easier than talking about what are some of the indicators you see in them. So when you start seeing someone develop around you, what is it that catches your eye when you start seeing emerging leaders stepping forward?
What I see is they have a true interest in not just the results, but how we get those results. They demonstrate a high level of integrity. They demonstrate a team approach, and that we win together or we lose together, but it really is about the unit. They demonstrate outstanding listening skills and the ability to listen, but not just listen, but hear what is being said or what may not be said. In some cases, people will say things to you, but there's an underlying message that you're missing. And it could be a subtlety, could be a tone, could be an expression. And it's very important for us to really understand what's going on underneath the words. I think when I see humility, when people understand that leadership and these great roles we get to serve in are only temporary, right? Especially when you look at an organization like ours that has been around 155 years. You think about it, I have a small slice in this continuum of this wonderful company to make an impact. But once I leave, people won't remember me. And that's okay. That's the way it should be. What we should be remembered for are our actions and how we leave the company when we are no longer working here full time. And so I look for people who can demonstrate that kind of leadership. It's about taking care of the long-term interest of our employees and the organization itself so that it will sustain itself for decades to come. Gratitude, I don't do that well, but somebody who appreciates what a wonderful company we work for and the opportunities that we have and the great people we get to work with. When we ask people, why do you work at Graybar? Number one answer is I like the people I work with. Number one. It has never changed in my 44 plus years. And so people who can appreciate that and appreciate how special we are and how special our people are, I look for those type of traits in what I would call our emerging leaders or the folks that I want to see running the company in the future.
I love that you said that it's about the people. Another consistency that we have found, Kathy, is that we will hear CEOs say this often. People don't leave organizations, they leave people. They move away from a poor or insufficient leader. So I appreciate you saying that. So you talked about this. You took a little bit of a detour when you moved into HR, and you were actually serving, I believe, at the same time, VP of HR and strategic planning. And I was, in our world, I was thinking about how do those two things merge, and I'd like to hear more about that. How does the VP of HR and strategic planning merge into some similarities to make some sense for the organization?
Well, being an employee-owned company and our business being wholesale distribution, the only differentiator we really have is our people. So when I was in strategic planning, my predecessor, Bob Reynolds, who's a good friend of mine, I'd worked for him for a number of years, called me in his office and said, "Hey, I would like you to be my VP of HR. It's a board position, it's an officer role and all this stuff." And I said, no, I'm not going to do it. It's a traditional female role. I'm not going to get stereotyped and pigeonholed. I worked too hard to be, a business person first. And no, I'm not going to do it. And he said, "No, I really want you to do this. Think about it." And I said, "No." So he said, "Go home and you talk to your husband." He knows my husband well. He goes, "Go talk to him and come back and give me your answer." So I go home and I talk to my husband and I said, "No, I'm going to get stuck there forever. When Bob retires, I'm going to be in HR forever and this isn't going to work." And my husband said, "Go back and talk to Bob again." I said, "Okay." So I go to Bob and he said, "Okay, I'm offering it to you again." And I said, "Bob, I really don't want to do this. First of all, I don't know anything about HR. I'm not a soft person. I'm not, I had a different vision of HR than obviously what it was when I got into the role." I said, "I'm not the person." And he said, "Yeah, you are. And I'll tell you why." He said, "HR and human capital is my strategy. And I need the best salesperson I have in the company to sell my vision and to sell the strategy." And he said, "So what's it going to take to get for you to accept?" I said, two things. Two. One, you better keep me with strategic planning then, because it keeps my foot in the business. And this way I can tie HR to the business results. I can have everything we do around human capital to support the business objectives. And he said, "Okay." And the second thing I said was, "Before you leave the company, put me back in the business so that whoever replaces you, I won't be in HR forever." And he said, "Done." I didn't ask for money or anything. I tell people all the time, you should always ask for a raise. I didn't ask for anything. I literally asked for those two things. He said, "Done." And I stepped into HR. Probably one of the best decisions that I ever made by far. I was able to really learn to appreciate the value of our people more than ever before. I saw the compassion, the warmth, the caring of our people on a regular basis, just things that you take for granted. I'll give you a story. Whenever we have a natural disaster, hurricanes or whatever, we do have people impacted because we're all over the United States. Our people inevitably step in to help these families in their biggest time of need. And there was a very difficult story during a Thanksgiving period. I got a phone call, and a family was driving from one location across the United States and was in a car accident. And I got the phone call saying that somebody lost their life, right? One of the family members. And these people are now in the hospital. The parents are in the hospital and such, and they're alone. They don't know anybody in that area. So we made a couple phone calls, and our branch manager, our local branch, who didn't know this family, didn't know the employee, nothing, showed up with his family to take turns to make sure that the family was not alone. Took care of everything to handle to make sure that family was supported so they could get everybody back home. and never asked for anything in return. That's the true value of a people-focused company. There's tons of stories like that where people donated cars to people who lost their cars in a flood, or took them into their homes when they were, had their home destroyed by a hurricane. To me, that's where I really learned how compassionate and caring and loving our people were. And I understood that my role as a leader now was to do my best to not let them down. So HR was a huge, huge move for me.
Well, the people that are not in the room couldn't see your face when you were emphatically saying no. That scowl on your face, I'm not going to do it. You just said, I'm not going to do it. It was not just no. It was a scowling look no that when you told them you weren't going to do it. But actually what I thought you were going to say when he said the reason you need to do this, I really thought he was going to say, and I think that he probably knew this, one day you're going to be the CEO. And getting this experience in HR is going to be one of the greatest assets on your tool belt as you progress in your journey. Because when you look back now, even telling the stories that you just told, I can tell the impact that they have made on your life. And now that is just part of the journey. That's part of you sharing the story of who Graybar is. We talked about this before we got started. Haley and I spend a lot of our time talking about Threaded Fasters from who we are, not just what we do. So that story that you told says so much about who Graybar is more than it does about what you do, which is focusing on people. And we're convinced if we focus on our people, the other things will take care of themselves in development and training and encouraging our people. So I appreciate you saying that. And I also love the listening versus hearing piece. We do intentional listening exercise. It started with me and my wife. We were having this difficulty, and I said, let me tell you what I heard you say. And I repeated it back to her, and she said, that's not what I said at all. So learning the difference between hearing and listening, I appreciate you pointing that out. Haley?
I also heard that you said that you focus on the long-term interest of your employees. And one of Graybar's core values is long-term view. So how do you balance the short-term performance with the long-term strategic goals of Graybar?
I don't think it's a one or an other. You have to perform in the short term so that you have the resources and capital available to make the long-term investment. And we always, when we make decisions, think about how it's going to impact the employees, but also how it's going to impact the company long-term. We're fortunate that our structure allows us to do that. If we had a publicly traded stock whose stock price varied every day, it would be much more difficult to make some of the huge investments that we're doing. But I'll give you an example of probably one of the best decisions I made, and I didn't realize it at the time, was when I first became the CEO. We had an operation in Puerto Rico, we still do, that had been struggling, losing money for a long time. And we were sitting there talking about, do we close it? Do we sell it? What do we do? And then a hurricane hit. You heard stories years ago about a hurricane hit, and it wiped out Puerto Rico. Well, it wiped out almost every single employee's home. So we sat there, and we sat there as an executive team and said, so what do we do? A lot of companies pulled out of Puerto Rico at that time. They said, it's not worth rebuilding. There's not enough this. There's not enough that. So we sat around as an executive team, and I went around the table and said, okay, what do you guys think we should do? We have an opportunity to get out of Puerto Rico because there's not going to be business for years. This thing isn't going to recover. So they ran around and everybody gave me their stories, and it hit me. When it came to me, everybody's looking at me and said, what are you going to do? And I thought that, and I said, you know what? I cannot close this operation. I don't care if we lose money. Because in my mind, I thought, if we shut down, these 30 some odd people have no way to rebuild their lives. They have no income. So I said to my CFO at the time, I said, Randy, how much will we lose if we have zero sales there for 5 years? And so he gave me a number, and I said, okay. And I looked at our, domestic guys and said, okay, will you commit to make this up so that we can protect Puerto Rico? And they said 100%. I said, we're keeping it open. Not only are we keeping it open, we're giving everybody an increase. So we gave them a salary increase. We ended up housing the folks in our facility for a while and didn't plan on making any money, didn't plan on anything. We planned on a loss. A year later, I fly to Puerto Rico to meet the families, because I always, after a natural disaster, want to go see how the families are doing. So I fly to Puerto Rico and I walk in. Not only are they thriving, They're making money for the first time in years. They are growing, they're expanding, they're booming. We were one of the only companies left on the island to help rebuild. These families came up to me telling me what it meant to them that we stayed and helped them, how we saved their children's lives, how we helped them rebuild their lives. And I could not have felt more emotional about it. And I didn't make the decision based off of the finances, right? Or a short-term decision. The easy decision would have been to walk away. What I decided was, if we're going to walk the talk of being employee-owned and truly caring about our people, and that we have a long-term vision for this company, that's exactly what we're going to do. And so to me, that's kind of an example. You got to look at the short term, but you also have to look at, if you truly have it as one of your core values, you got to make some decisions sometimes that may cost you in the short run, but are better for the long term.
I appreciate you saying that, because there are so many times when we have the opportunity to make a knee-jerk reaction that looks like a quick fix, but when you stay the course, you stay the investment route, you stay the people-centric route, I am convinced that the people in the team then take the mantra themselves and create the success. The momentum becomes theirs. In what, in our world, it's not metaphorical ownership, it's literal ownership. We are part of ownership of our organizations, and I appreciate how you sow into them. So, Kathy, with having 9,000 employees across the globe, your organization is so big. And when we talk about communicating culture and who we are, what are some of the challenges? I know that you feel it important to be in front of your team and speaking to them, but speaking to 9,000 people, how are you intentional on being very communicative with all 9,000? How do you do that?
Probably not as well as I should. I have a formal teleconference with the employees a few times a year. We have all sorts of communication vehicles, whether it's articles or, interviews, that type of thing. We do try to visit the branches, not just myself, but my entire leadership team. We're in the process now of trying to get to all the branches over a couple-year period. And we have a lot of them, hundreds of them. So each one of us tries to get there to make sure we can meet each employee in the company and at least shake their hand and talk to them and hear their story. I think it's important for us to hear what is going on in their lives and to make sure that we answer any questions they may have. And they ask some doozies. I visit branches. We attend events where we engage with employees and answer their questions. Twice a year, we bring in about 400 or 500 of our employees for training conferences, and I'm at every single one. I've been to all of them. There's only 2 people in the company who have been to every single one, and I'm one of the 2. We also attend, we were just at an award ceremony with our customer service rep. So we sit and talk to them and, again, hear their stories, find out what they want to hear about or what they want to know about to make sure we try to communicate it back. It's important for us to tell folks where we're headed, especially in these days where it's not clear. There's a lot of unknowns out there. There's a lot of people who are concerned about a variety of different things. One of our employees said to me the other night, I'm glad that you stay on top of all the stuff going on in the world, that you stay on top of all the geopolitical and you're involved in all this legislative stuff, because I don't want to look at the news and be worried about it, but I'm glad that you think about it so that you protect us. And so for me, part of this is let's hear what is on their mind. What are their fears, concerns? What do they want to know to feel comfortable with the direction of the company? Because if they feel safe and they feel comfortable and they understand that we're going to have a company here for the long term, then they can take that off their plate of concern and focus on taking care of their families, right? And then they're going to show up at work and do a good job and work really hard and then be able to have the life that they want to without worrying about work. My job is to make sure they don't worry about the big things, right? I need the big things. They take care of that customer. That's the deal.
Well, speaking about sustainability and security for a team, and when you speak to them and when you sow into them and create that comfort for them on this is where we're going, this is how we're going to get there, I believe pays huge dividends. I know that it does for our team. I know we have a lot of curious questions that come when we put feelers out there for questions, and I enjoy getting those variety of questions and then strategizing on how we make sure that we answer those questions in a way that is constructive. So we are on the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership podcast with Kathy Mazzarella, and we'll be right back.
Threaded Fasteners is a 100% employee-owned company whose mission is to create value in and for the people we serve. So, if you're interested in learning more about how we develop a people-centric culture, or if you're interested in a customized fastener solution, send us an email at culture@threadedfasteners.com. That's culture@threadedfasteners.com.
All right, everyone, we're back on the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership podcast, and we're with Kathy Mazzarella. She is the CEO of Graybar, Fortune 500 distributor of electrical, communications, and data networking products. Haley, you have a question?
I do indeed. Kathy, you once said, if we intend to remain relevant in a world that's being disrupted, we must not be complacent. We must disrupt ourselves. Otherwise, we will be disrupted by others and lose our leadership position in the industry. So what are you doing at Graybar to stay competitive and innovative in this constantly evolving industry?
It's a multifaceted strategy. As I mentioned earlier, I never settle. So people who work for me, it's always about what's next. Yeah, great. We celebrate. And then it's about today. So I've been thinking a long time about, Graybar's legacy. And when you look at Graybar's history, we have been involved with so many things throughout the development of the United States. We were always on the leading edge, whether it's selling new products or services and such. We can get complacent, though, if we don't force ourselves out of our comfort zone, because when you have success for that long, it's very easy to take a breath and sit back and say, we're good enough. Well, we're not, because competition is moving faster and competition is kicking us in the tail periodically. So what happened is we had all these innovations for a number of decades, and then we stopped and our competitors caught up. So one of the things I said to our team is, before I retire, what we need to do is do all the big stuff so that the next generation who comes in can build upon that and deal with whatever challenges or opportunities they have. So when you look at it, distribution has to deal with technology, people, systems, processes, and basic infrastructure. So we're kind of doing it all now. I spoke to our consultant yesterday and he started laughing. He says, most companies do one at a time. You're doing all of them at the same time. I said, yeah. Time is of the essence. We need to do it all. And I think our organization can deal with it. We were so focused on inorganic growth. And if the market's not growing, what happens is, of course, then you're not growing. So how do we supplement what we do well with companies who can do stuff that we don't do well in areas we don't perform? So we started some acquisitions, which we hadn't necessarily done in the past. Helps us to diversify our business. And it also shields us from any kind of economic downturn. So we're doing that. We also are investing in organic growth. We're adding additional net sales reps every single year, hundreds of them, because I also feel we need to build our own talent and continue to promote from within. So we continually enhance our sales organization, pushing ourselves outside our comfort zone, knowing we need to expand our organic base. So we're investing in people organically and inorganically. We're strengthening our logistics platform. We invest a lot of money into our logistics. We have hundreds of warehouses throughout the United States, thousands of vehicles throughout the United States. What we're doing now is challenging ourselves to say, what is the next level of logistics? Where do we need to go? Are we in the right locations? What part of robotics do we need or not need? How much automation do we need? What kind of transportation modeling do we need? What kind of software do we need? I want to get ahead of the competition again from the logistics infrastructure and inventory management and customer service. And then we're doing what is our biggest project ever, which is what we call Graybar Connect. That's a huge multi-year project, hundreds of millions of dollars. It's massive, and it will involve every single person in the company. It's about us reimagining the company's existing infrastructure and every process to create a seamless and personalized experience for customers, employees, suppliers. It's huge. We are going to be doing everything, soup to nuts, basically automate or eliminate things that do not provide value to our customers, automate or eliminate things that do not require human judgment, because I want people to do things that bring value, that develop their skills, that test them. Routine tasks, the system can do that. I want human beings to do what they do best, which is really the art of humanity. And we're going to balance it with the science of technology. So when I start thinking about innovation, we're doing it all. We're doing growth innovation. We're going into new markets with new product categories, new services, doing our logistics infrastructure and our entire technology and process systems all at the same time. It's a little bit much.
I was going to say, so what do you do for fun? That's a lot of work to do. I mean, and you know, we were talking about the our outside board member has been a consultant for us and became a board member. And one of the things she likes to talk about is the art of the possible. I love that phrase, the art of humanity, and how you bring your team in to be those creative thinkers, to be those contributors to the conversation, to how can we do this better. When you said I'm always talking about what's next, hey, I seen Haley get a big smile on her face because that's one of our phrases. I have trouble with what's now because I'm always in the what's next. Even struggle at times with what month it is, what season it is, because we're already, you know, into the fall and into the winter, already thinking about what the next things are. So with that though, Kathy, and I mean, I love my work and I'm very passionate about my work. I can see it in your explanations of what you do and how you do it. How do you create space for that work-life balance, and not just for you, but also to make sure that your team is not going to experience burnout? Because admittedly, you're a driver. You're somebody who wants to go fast and wants to go hard. And when you look around you, how do you ensure that your team is not experiencing burnout? Because I think there are a lot of develop and executive leaders listening to this answer because it's a critical question that we face as leaders, because we don't want to look around and all of a sudden it's just us. Everybody else is left. So how do we encourage that work-life balance and then ensure it for our others around us?
Years ago, I realized that I needed to make sure that I didn't impose my level of intensity on everybody all the time. I mean, my family gets exhausted. I've been married for 40 years and, my husband's always like, stop already. So I just have that in me. I'm intense in everything I do. So I try to really not do that to everybody else. Now I do start at 4 a.m. and I send emails and stuff at 4 every morning. I get my reports, but I also have told people over the years, that doesn't mean you need to respond to me at 4 o'clock in the morning, right? This is just part of my routine. Get it out there and then start moving on. I sit down and I talk to my team a lot about making sure that they spend time with their families. When I was coming up, I really focused on the career. My husband was a scientist. He's a PhD, so he has his own career. But it was challenging at times having 2 working parents. We had no support system. I have 2 children. Because my parents were in California, my mother-in-law was in California, so we were on our own. So trying to balance everything, I look back now and I'm surprised we survived because we just kept moving forward. And the stress and strain that it put on everybody was difficult. I tell our leaders all the time that they need to make a choice. Don't let life just happen to you. And during your life, you're going to have things that give and take. This whole work-life balance doesn't work. I've never seen it work, especially as an executive. I think your life needs to be integrated. And you have to understand that at certain times you need more focus of work. At certain times you need more focus on family. At certain times you need more focus on community. And of course, you need to spend some time on yourself. But that's going to change depending on where you are in your life or the season of life. When I was coming up the ranks, I worked. I was going to school at night. I was traveling. I had 2 young children. My husband was in school, so I had to support him through school. It was tough. So I worked and worked and worked. I had no hobbies at all. As a grandma now, I'm not going to miss the opportunity to see my grandchildren. And I'm very fortunate that they live right behind me. So every day that I am home, I get to see them. I get to experience things that I did not get to see with my own children. And the folks that work with me, they want me to do that. They say I'm a much nicer person when my grandchildren are around, or if I have to take a conference call. And, people who work for me now are seeing a different side of me also, the Nana side, as they call it. But I am very aware of the fact that what worked for me and my husband is probably not the same idea of success for others. It's important for each leader and each person to define success in their own way. And that means you want to have a great career, but you want to be the best parent in the world. Well, you know what? Then do that. And I'm going to support you to do that, right? Because that's important to you. If you want to be this career person and, focus on, I don't know what, being CEO, great. Let's work toward that goal, but understand the fact that every once in a while you need to sit back and take a breath. Every once in a while you need to sit back and appreciate the blessings that we have. Don't let life just happen to you. Make a conscious choice as to what you're going to do. So I try to make sure the people don't miss the big events, right? I mean, if you have something coming up, don't miss that parents teachers conference, because you're not going to get that time back. And what happens is when they go to that parents teacher conference, my leadership team comes back even more energized to do a better job and a good job, right? And I hope that they demonstrate those same type of caring for their own employees, because, life, again, is very complicated and it goes way too fast. And I don't want these people to miss out on the fullness of their lives.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, and really got to see, again, a glimpse of grandmother come out when you begin to talk about your grandchildren and to see that smile that come up on your face. There's something about those grandchildren. I told my wife one time, I said, if I would have known grandchildren were so good, we'd have had those first. They're just so much better than
I agree.
So being a grandparent and navigating through the grandparenting days is quite the blessing, as you said. So with all that, one of the things that we want to get to asking you is we ask these questions to everyone that comes on about, we're going to ask you about some people that influenced you along your journey. You already mentioned your dad, but I want to hear about what other business leader or someone in your journey influenced you. But before that, how are you kind of staying on the learning edge? So in personal development yourself, I mean, are you still reading a lot? Are you still doing a lot of things that are, I'm getting towards the end of the runway, but I still find myself, I was up this morning reading about leading with significance. So does the journey really ever end for the CEO?
No. And I don't think the journey ever ends for any of us as people in general. It should never, because we have unlimited capacities to learn as human beings. We all have different gifts. Some people will be great CEOs, some people will be great salespeople, some people will be great nurses or whatever it is, right? But I think it's important for us to continue to learn, to keep our brains active, because then it helps you recognize opportunities around you, not just in the workplace, but in your life in general. So I do lots of reading, like to your point, I'm always reading something. I have a coach. I've had a coach for decades, and he helps ground me and to make me realize that I am a human being, that I can't do everything perfect all the time. It's okay to fail every once in a while. It's part of being a human. I serve on outside boards, so I have a lot of opportunities to see how some really outstanding companies operate. The one thing I find consistent when I go to these board meetings or get involved with outside organizations is I come back appreciating my company even more, because I realize how wonderful it is and really how well managed it is. It's not me. It's the way it's been for decades. I'm involved in peer groups with the industry. I sit on our National Association of Wholesalers board. I'll be chair in a year or so. I also attend executive education courses. So I try to do as much as I can for inputs across a wide variety of areas and topics. Again, whether it's legislative, whether it's geopolitical, whether it's community things, whether it's social, what's going on in the world from a social, environment. I try to make sure that I know as much as I can, so that when faced with some kind of a decision, especially that will impact a large group of people, that I can try to make the best informed decision I can.
Well, I appreciate that, saying that the journey really never does end. And whether that journey is the post-CEO world for me or whatever that looks like, the continuing learning, continuing to be able to go into other companies, whether it's serving on boards or just encouraging leaders, going in and being an encouragement to other business leaders, because we've been so blessed on our journey, and that would be a privilege to be able to do that, to share some of the stories, share some of the experiences. And I know you're doing that as serving on boards, but then, as you said, you bring it back and it becomes a part of your story. If nothing else, sometimes we learn that we're doing it right by going and listening to those other inputs. We're doing it right and really feel good about that. So when, you're moving towards, you even mentioned this word a while ago, legacy, and what is Graybar going to remember about you You touched on it earlier, but what are some of the things that you're proud of that you helped be a part of that accomplishment while you were there? And it really speaks to legacy, because they're going to remember you, whether you believe that or not. They will remember you because your fingerprints are already all over the organization. But what are some of the things you're most proud of as we kind of come towards the end of the interview here?
You know, we have financial objectives, and it was really cool. When I took over, I said to the team, okay, we're going to set unrealistic goals in a realistic time frame, like my dad used to say. So we said, we're going to double the business in X amount of time. We're going to quadruple the profit in X amount of time. We're going to do all this stuff. And I remember the CFO looked at me and he said, you know that we can't do that. And I said, well, we're going to do this. We're going to build the plans and we're going to set these goals anyways. So off we go. Well, we broke through every single one of those goals. We made every one of them a lot quicker than we even thought. And what it taught all of us was that if you set your mind to it, you can do it. That the power of our organization is unlimited. That, to me, I hope I leave that stamp that we shouldn't short sell ourselves. We shouldn't settle because we're good enough. We can even be better. And as employee owners, we owe it to ourselves to never settle, to always do better for each one of us, right? I mean, this is really the story. So for me, that was a huge thing. And I hope they remember that nothing's impossible, nothing. I also hope people remember me as somebody who truly cared about the company. And I tried my best to leave the company better than when I came in, so that there's a foundation where all the big stuff is taken care of, so that this team that comes after us can just build upon it to make us even better and stronger. Employee ownership, to me, is everything to this company. It's everything to me. And it's because of the employee owners who took an interest in a kid that other companies probably would have thrown aside. This employee ownership structure is who I am and what I stand for. And we need to make sure that we continue to, anchor everything we do around that, but also realize it needs to evolve without losing the soul and essence of what that means. And my final thing really is to put in place great leaders. I want to make sure people realize I made a difference in somebody's life too, quite honestly, just as a human being. I don't know about you, but at the end of the day, I want people to remember that I might have helped somebody toward either a goal or to have a better life. And if I've done that, there's a good chance that person will pay it forward, which means it should spread out to a larger group. And that means I actually mattered, right? At the end of the day, that my life mattered.
No question about that. The impact that you're making on people's lives is incredible. When we talk about the number of people that we get to interact with, you've got 9,000 employees, but those are fluid. Those aren't just 9,000 people you've impacted. It's when they go home and the people that you've impacted from their own personal wealth. As employee owners, you're affecting thousands of people because those employee owners go back into the home, and we have found employee ownership. Matter of fact, we just had our investment group in yesterday, and we were talking about the benefits of our organization. And when you layer on top of that employee ownership, it is exponentially beneficial to the employee owners at our company. So again, well done to you. So Kathy, when we come back into the meeting room, we ask every leader this question. If there was an emerging leader sitting here with us in the room and they were asking you, what can I do to get started on my leadership journey? What would be your encouragement to them? You can start this today. How would you answer that question?
Realize you're going to have to work really hard. So you have to be willing to put in the work. And with the work, there's going to be sacrifices and choices. And it's not just you sacrificing, it's your family that also makes sacrifices and choices. But understand that it will be okay. I talk about people all the time. They'll say, well, I may miss this or I may miss. Well, I have two daughters that turned out to be rock stars on their own. And I wasn't around a whole lot, right? My husband took care of them mostly because I was always traveling or doing something. And I think about it a lot that my kids probably turned out better because I wasn't around all the time, right? They saw that we made choices. And I tell them all the time, you have no student loans. You have multiple degrees and all this stuff because I worked hard so that you had opportunities to have these great educations, to have these great lives, to travel all over the world, to do all this stuff. It's a choice we made as a family and a sacrifice we all made. And the children saw hard work. So you have to give yourself some grace as leaders too, is that you're going to make choices that may be tough on you and your family. Your family will be okay. Your children will learn from your example to understand what hard work, dedication, loyalty, sense of duty is all about. It's also important to not give up when things get hard. Nobody's path is straight to the top that I've ever met. So resilience, perseverance, grit is going to be very, very important in your life because life isn't always good and business isn't always good. My dad said you need to prepare in good times for when times aren't good. That's part of your role as leaders. And so learning that that's part of the pattern and to learn that don't let failure define you and don't let other people put you in a box and limit who you are. It's important for you to define who you are. And people will fight against you your whole career. I don't care who you are. They'll tell you all the reasons you can't do something. They're going to tell you all the reasons you don't fit. If you let people define you like that and you stay limited, then you have really let not just yourself down, but the people you love down too in the communities in which you live, because you have gifts that need to be developed and your potential needs to be developed. So don't let people deter you when you have a vision or a dream. And at the end of the day, the number one leadership lesson is this, that true leadership is about everybody except you. Leadership is about every other person. It's very easy as a CEO, especially, to get caught up in, it's all about me. Look at all the fancy stuff. Everybody pays attention to me. Look at this life I lead. But at the end of the day, it really is about everybody else that's out there that has to get the job done. You need to bring the best out in them and make them feel that they truly matter, because that's what your company's all about.
I appreciate you saying that. I think that if every CEO or every leader in the organization had on their desk, it's not about me, that they would read that message each time that they sit down at their desk. I actually am working on, from the recommendation of our one of our last guests, reading the book, The Hard Thing About Hard Things, and pushing through and persevering. And I appreciate you mentioning that. That is part of our journey, is to press through those hard things. So, well, Kathy, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you coming on and being with us. We've been with Kathy Mazzarella. She is the chairman and CEO of Graybar. Kathy, it's been an honor and a joy for us to spend a few minutes with you. Thank you for making time for us on the podcast today.
Thank you. And I wish you much success in your journey as you continue what you're doing and then the next phase of your journey, because I'm facing that myself. And who am I when I'm not in this role? So it's quite daunting at times when you've been with a company as long as we both have been with our organizations.
Yep. And my wife and I are talking about this more and more. It's more frequent in our conversations daily. So I appreciate you saying that. All right. This is the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership podcast. And Haley and I will be right back with some closing thoughts. All right. We're back in the meeting room. Haley, what a cool episode with Kathy Mazzarella. It was in the works for a long time. I think we've been working on this for almost 3 months, getting her to be with us, and kind of after the show and after we were kind of off the interview list, and when she was talking about our similarities in our culture, hearing some of the things, some of the feedback going back and forth, that's quite an honor to be put into that same category with Graybar and the success that they've had. So what were your takeaways?
It was one of the very first things that Kathy said, and it was what she had heard from her father, which was always reach for the top. And it's something that resonated with me because there's a little piece of me that says, well, I don't want to go around and saying, oh, I want to be CEO, or I want to be the, VP of marketing, whatever that may be. But to her, that was important to say, not only in day one, but in the interview of this is where I want to be. And it's kind of setting those expectations, not only for yourself, but also for the company that you're with.
I thought that her specifically talking about the different strategies that they have implemented, but when she talked about the human strategy, when she was in that time that she spent at HR and how important she found that to be, I believe, central to her understanding of the people portion of the business and how important it was, and how HR and the human capital that is part of this organization, the greatest part of our organization is our human capital. So we appreciate Kathy coming on the podcast. It was I appreciate you getting that all lined up. So till we meet again, tighten up.
Tighten up. Thank you for joining the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership podcast, brought to you by the employee owners of Threaded Fasteners. If you enjoyed our conversation, please subscribe to, rate, and review the Nuts and Bolts of Leadership wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Do you have a leadership story to tell or a question to ask? Email us at podcast@threadedfasteners.com. That's podcast@threadedfasteners.com. This show is made possible by our family at Threaded Fasteners, Inc. Our mission is to create value in and for the people we serve. Interested in learning more about TFI and how we create value in our team, in our communities, and in our customers? Visit threadedfasteners.com. Thank you again for listening. I'm your co-host and producer, Haley Gibson.
And I'm your host, Billy Duran.
This show is edited and produced by Johnny Glenn and our friends at Deep Fried Studios.